Good morning, Burbs. My name is Azalara, and today I'll be talking about the 3 15-star weapon series that are now released on PSO2 Global. You might have seen this in the news already, but the 3 weapons are going to be the Ophistia Series, the Atlas X Series, and the Trailblazer Xion series. So the question remains, which one of these are actually the best to invest in for the long-term investment? Since PSO2 Global's pace is going really fast, you might have already experienced the fact that a lot of weapons may be outdated really fast or something like that. So I'm here to answer that question for you. Now, before I explain how all the weapon potentials and everything works, you might have noticed that at the very bottom of the page, there's a disclaimer that says at a later date you will be able to upgrade these weapons' potential to an enhanced version. Because of this reason alone, that the enhanced potentials does exist, I'll be talking about them rather than the base potentials, because all the enhanced potentials does really is just increase the damage that the potentials do. So for an example, the Trailblazer weapons, the normal potential is actually just 10%, but the enhanced is 17%, and the rest of the effects stay the same. So for the long-term investment's sake, I think it's just better to talk about the newer potentials, because they do stack up quite a bit differently against each other and also the other weapons in the game, but only to a certain extent, which I will be explaining later on. Alright, so moving on to the very first weapon that we're going to be talking about, which is the Ophistia weapon series. This weapon series is created by combining your Invade, Nemesis, Raven, and Ares weapons together. So all of you playing PSO2 Global should be very familiar with all these weapons, as if you've been farming Ultimate for the past I don't know how long, you'd probably be seeing all these weapons fly around everywhere, and also even on the player market. Unlike the 2 other weapons in this video that we're going to be talking about, the creation of the Ophistia series is not limited by any amount of stones or anything of the sort. Theoretically, you can create as many as you want, as long as you have the resources for it. And that is the one big advantage of the Ophistia weapon series. For anyone who's playing multiple classes or characters like me, it's really easy to look at the Ophistia series as like the last fallback. For example, you already exhausted all your stones to create the Atlas series or something like that. You can make the Ophistia series because it's rather easily accessible, and with the upgraded potential, there's nothing really much better that's not limited. So yeah, Ophistia series is always a good fallback. So now let's talk about what it does. Initially looking at the Ophistia weapon series, you might be a little overwhelmed only because it has 3 weapon potentials that you must pick one from. But the reality of it is the fact that once the new enhanced potentials do come out, only one of the 3 potentials is enhanced, and that is basically the potential that you will be using permanently. And that potential is Dark Phantom, also known as Phantasmal Darkness in the Japanese version of the game. So for that reason alone, I will be focusing only on Dark Phantom's potential. So what does it do? Dark Phantom's potential gives you anywhere between an 18 to 20% damage bonus depending on how full your Photon Blast gauge is. So when you don't have your Photon Blast gauge charged, your damage is 18%, and while it's maxed, it's 20%. A difference of 2%. But now here's where the fun part actually comes in. Depending on which type of Photon Blast your mag has, it adds an additional effect to your weapon's potential. The effects are as following. When you use a Helix, it increases your power by 6%. If you're using Ajax, it increases your attack PP recovery by 60%. If you're using Ketos, it increases your natural PP recovery by 40%. If you're using Julius, it decreases damage taken by 15%. And Ilios reduces your PP consumption by 20%. As a fun fact, if you have multiple mags, you can actually stack all these effects together. For example, you use a Helix mag first for the 6% damage, then you swap your mag, and then you use a Ketos for the 40% recovery. And because the effects do stack, now your weapon potential is the 20% damage plus the 6% from Helix and plus 40% natural recovery from Ketos. Realistically, it's not really something practical that you would probably do on a normal basis, but it's just something fun. The more you know, right? Generally, the only 2 effects that people really look at is Helix and Ketos. Because Helix at max adding that 6% actually maxes your enhanced Ophistia potential at 27.2% damage, even though the Helix only said it's at 6%. Why? I'm probably not going to explain it because PSO2 math can be complicated, but just know that it's 27.2% as the highest potential. So overall, despite the weapon's low base stats, it can actually do a hefty sum of damage due to its amount of multipliers that it does have. So now begs the question, do those multipliers allow the Ophistia weapons to actually compete with the other weapons? Comparatively to the other 2 weapons that I'm going to talk about in this video, and also the future weapon series that we'll be releasing, Unfortunately, for general uses, Ophistia is just not stronger than it necessarily. There are of course cases where when you stack like the helix and a lot of the effects, it might be stronger, but it's a lot more trouble than it's worth. And even if it is stronger, it is not by a very noticeable margin, to be completely honest with you. Plus later on, when True PD or Gomorrah comes out, you guys are going to have a really easy access to these weapons called the Ayer series. Although to note, the name is not necessarily confirmed for the global server, so you might want to check in on that information a bit later. But in my opinion, Ayer is just basically a better austere in every way, and is also super easily accessible as well. So as a recap, overall the Ophistia series are actually pretty good in general. It's one of those fallback weapons where if you don't have any more stones to create any of these stronger Atlas, Lightweaver, or any of those weapons that actually needs a stone to create, with the stone being limited of course, you can definitely look back to the Ophistia series and say, hey, this is what I'm gonna go for. Assuming that there is nothing better available at the time. Although there's one more use for the Ophistia series that I did not mention here yet, and that is it being a PP battery. I'll be covering that topic in a later part of the video, but if you're interested, you can check out the timestamps in the description below. Alright then, now we're going to be moving on to the next weapon series, which is going to be the Atlas X series. The potential is called Unflagging Spirit, also known as Immortal Soul over on the Japanese server. This potential gives you a damage increase of 18%. And in addition to that, you also get what is basically a guaranteed Iron Will. What that means is if something were to kill you and it kills you, you don't die when you were killed. In other words, you survive with exactly 1 HP. This effect can only activate once per quest, so be sure to keep track of it. How this weapon is made is by combining your 14-star Atlas weapon with the 14-star Lumiere weapon that you've been grinded from the Bewitched woods for a very long time. There's actually a whole article by the official PSO2 Global team that actually goes into a lot of details about how all these 15-star weapons are made, or well, at least these 3 are made. So please check the link in the description below if you want to see the details of how they are made. Now what sets the Atlas X apart from the other 2 is the availability of the SSA slots. Atlas X weapons can support S1, 2, 3, and 4, while the Ophistia and the Trailblazer series can only support S1, 2, and 3. In the cases for some class combinations in their weapons, having an S4 slot is a lot more valuable than you might think. For example, the cases of playing Tekker and using the wand. Having the S4 wand impact and increase your normal attack speed for the wand, and also removing the hit stop is extremely valuable. That is such a big damage increase compared to any other damaging potential that you can do. So sometimes it's important to look at the intrinsic value of a certain S4 and seeing if it's more worth than actually getting, say, the potential for the Trailblazer weapon or something like that. So another case that is very interesting is, for example, if you're playing Gunner Fighter. The reason Atlas X is so much better for Gunner Fighter is because it allows you to have that safety net of the guaranteed Iron Will, and also if you play with Lifesteal Strike S4, you get all the survivability that you need that the fighter subclass does not provide. Because when you're playing Gunner Fighter, you're actually doing a lot more damage than Gunner Hunter does. However, you lose all the survivability that the Hunter sub provides in exchange for more damage. But with the Atlas X alone, having the lifesteal and having the guaranteed Iron Will as your safety net, by those things alone, you offset the loss of the survivability with even more survivability, so therefore it is a really good choice for that class combination. There are cases like these where you really have to think of the value of the S4, especially for the class that you are playing, since each class and each weapon really does value very different things. Unless you're playing Summoner, you don't have to think of any of this because SSAs don't exist on Summoner. But jokes aside, honestly, Atlas X is probably, if not the best weapon series out of these 3, if we're talking about the current time that it's being released in. However, because of the nature of Atlas X itself, it's really easy to be replaced by the newer weapons that are going to be released, in the very specific order of Novel and Liberate weapons, which will be releasing around when episode 6 hits. And then there's also the Still weapons and the Ayer weapons and yada, which basically all replaces the Atlas X very easily. The reason for that is because the potential is just not as utility based as the other 2 weapons here in this video. As I mentioned a little bit earlier that the Ophistia weapon series can be used as a PP battery, I will tell you that the Trailblazer series is literally a PP battery incarnate as a whole. The usage of PP battery allows you to either 1, you don't have to use your normal attacks to restore your PP while attacking a boss, which results to more DPS, or 2 when you basically have nothing to hit and you just want to restore your PP. So just imagine that one case where you're just fighting a boss and then you're hitting this really nice flow where you're really in the zone, and then you attack the enemy and then you realize that your attack didn't come out because you're low on PP. Imagine if you can fill that 200 missing PP immediately in less than a second by just swapping to your Trailblazer weapons, activate the potential, and then return to your primary weapon to do more damage. The utility of being able to get over 200 something PP, depending on how much your PP bar is actually insane. So with that said, let's talk about the Trailblazer Xion series. So out of this 3 weapon series, if I were to tell you to invest into one, I would highly recommend all of you watching this video right now to invest into the Trailblazer series. Whether you're playing Global or JP, this is relevant. But yeah, I highly recommend that you actually invest into at least one weapon of the series to use, whether it be a main weapon, a sub weapon, or even just for utility. So let's talk about the weapon's potential. What makes it so strong? Your damage is increased by a flat 17%, and in addition to that, when you cast any photon art or technique while you're below 10% of your PP, it will fully restore your PP and give you an additional power bonus of 3% for 30 seconds. This ability has a cooldown time of 2 minutes and also cools down when you are not having the weapon out. This is the reason that it's so good to be used as a PP battery, because in the future when you're using, for example, a Lightweaver weapon, you can easily swap to your Trailblazer weapon to restore your PP and then just swap back to your Lightweaver weapon. And that is the power of the utility of the Trailblazer weapon series. It's rather easily accessible because in the future you're going to be able to buy 14-star weapons, in which you can just buy out the Starquake series straight up from the market and be like, oh, I guess I'm just going to use the Amphoite Stone and make this into a Trailblazer series. It's that easy to make. The only other weapon by far in PSO2 JP that has a better PP restoration potential than the Trailblazer series is the Genin series. But that can get pretty expensive and also a little weird to use sometimes, so I'm not going to get into that for now. But even if you do have the Genin, it doesn't hurt having a Trailblazer weapon. Plus, as I said, it's really easy to make and you can just use it as like a secondary weapon or something for your alt characters or something like that. So honestly, I don't really see it being a loss. And also damage wise, it only really loses to some of the more endgame weapons of episode 6. So yeah, Trailblazer Xion, not a bad investment. No matter who you are and what server you play, I will recommend you get at least one copy of any weapon. And now before anyone in the comments literally go, but Hazel, the weapon is limited by a stone. I don't have any more stones. I can only make one weapon. No, that's exactly where you're wrong because, you know, the Amphoite stones are actually really common. At least in JP it is. Point being that I probably have around like 5 more Amphoite stones lying around, even though I already have at least like, I don't know, 3, 4 Trailblazer weapons. I mean, yeah, you kind of get them from a lot of sources. And by this point in PSO2 Global, you already have at least 1 Amphoite stone from the battle pass. There's going to be more that you can get from getting the Dark Falz Persona kills, which is going to come out very soon. There's going to be Sage's Crest, which you can also trade them for. The first urgent quest of episode 6, aka Armada of Despair, tentative name, also gives you an Amphoite stone to make a Trailblazer weapon. So all in all, there is a lot of sources for the Trailblazer weapons and the Amphoite stones, so you do not have to worry at all about the availability of the weapon. So by this point, you've probably already heard me mention and talk about the PP utility of the weapons and how it can be used as a PP battery. Let's go into very specifically how it works. So within the S-Class special abilities, or the SSAs, there's this one very specific SSA that slots into slot 1 and 2 called Luminous Adaptation on Global or Spirited Response in JP. What this SSA does is that it stops your natural PP recovery while your weapon is unsheathed, and then increases it by 100% while your weapon is sheathed. And since the Luminous Adaptation is not available on the S3 slot, you put Luminous Grace instead, which increases your PP regeneration by another 20%. So imagine this, if you're using an Ophistia weapon with Luminous Adaptation for S1 and S2 and Luminous Grace for S3, alongside with using a Ketos Mag that will increase your PP regeneration by another 40%, that's some insane PP restoration. As you can see the example here I'm showing on the screen, the PP restoration on the Ophistia weapon is so much, like, significantly higher than your natural PP regeneration, so this is why we call this thing a PP battery. Of course, you can also put all these SSAs on some other weapons with the S1, 2, and 3 slot, for example, like the Trailblazer weapons. So you can have like kind of a 2-in-1 PP restoration kind of tool. But personally for me, I don't do that, only because I actually use the Trailblazer weapons as weapons, and rather put a damage SSA on it instead. Which is why I do have the Ophistia weapons separated with the Trailblazer weapons. PP batteries are not necessarily hard to make, but having one helps a lot more than not. But in the case that you really do not have access to the Luminous adaptations, whether it be because it's really expensive in the market or something like that. Also, I apologize if I break the market for making this video, but you can definitely look at the Mirage series weapons, which we'll be releasing a little bit later on down the line as well, because those are really good PP batteries innately. The Mirage weapon's potential gives you an innate plus 250% PP restoration when your weapon is sheathed, and the results are rather similar to using the Ophistia weapons too. And even better, they're really accessible 14 star. So honestly, in the future, once the Mirage weapons comes out and whatnot, you really don't have an excuse to not have a PP battery. Only because how easily accessible everything is. Alright, so now that we learned all 3 weapons and what they do, here's a small recap. The Ophistia weapons are really powerful, but not more powerful than the stone limited weapons. So either use this weapon as like a last fallback when you don't have anything to make anymore and you want more 15 star weapons, or 2, use it as a PP battery. The Atlas X is very powerful and potentially can be stronger than the Trailblazer weapons. But most of the time it would depend on your accessibility to the S4 ability and also a little bit of case by case to a large extent. So you can weigh in your options there. And lastly, the Trailblazer weapon series, you can use it as a main or as a sub weapon, or you can also just use it as pure utility as well. So out of the 3 weapons, there will be a lot more uses for the Trailblazer weapons as a whole. Which is exactly why I will suggest you to invest into this weapon long term, as it is both easily accessible and very powerful. Whew, so that was a lot of information and hope it wasn't too overwhelming for you. I hope that this video guide can aid and help you in making your decisions in which weapons that you will be making in the near future here. So be sure to think of everything and think of whether you're actually going to play for the short-term investment or the long-term investment. I personally recommend selecting the long-term investment only due to the pace of PSO2 Global right now. With episode 6 right around the corner, the Novel and Liberated weapons are going to be coming in very soon, so Atlas X will kind of be power crept quite a bit, by at minimum of like 10 or 15% damage flat. So if you do decide to replace your Atlas X weapon later down the line, you can of course still use the utility of the Ophistia weapons and the Trailblazer weapons with that. Or, if you decide to use the Trailblazer weapons as your main weapon, you can transfer the damage SSAs that you put on it onto a different weapon when you get it. Since the SSAs are actually transferable easily without having to reaffix everything. Or simply you can just not replace anything and then just use the better SSAs that we'll be releasing in the future for the new weapons when you do make them in the future. And that also applies to when Liberate also gets creeped by the Still weapons and the Ayer weapons. Although by the time that episode 6 comes out in PSO2 Global, I'll probably make a little bit of a small video covering the Liberate weapons and how it's going to be a very powerful weapon in the future, especially when it is buffed. So until then, take care of yourself and don't forget to smile. I'll see you on the next video.